Welcome to Thread of Terror. We bring you the creepiest stories from Reddit. Dim the lights, grab a blanket, and hit subscribe so you never miss a scare. Cops and other law enforcement people of Reddit. What were some cases you worked on that made you think, even if for a moment, that something supernatural, paranormal was going on? Story 1. Silent 911 Call.
A police officer working the desk from 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. responded to an unusual situation. Many years ago, the police department had offered an alarm monitoring service. Although most places had transitioned to newer systems, there were still 10 to 12 locations hardwired into the old system. Disconnecting the system entirely would have required dismantling a lot of equipment, so they simply kept it operational. During this officer's shift, the fire alarm signal went off. The first shift dispatcher had already clocked in and took the call. As the officer headed out the door toward the fire department, the emergency line 911 rang from the same address. When the officer answered, no one was on the other end of the line. Assuming the caller might have passed out before being able to speak, the officer bolted out the back door, jumped into a squad car, and radioed in the 911 call over Channel 3, which both police and fire departments could hear. The officer stated they were heading directly to the house. Upon arrival, another unit was already on the scene. They found no signs of smoke or anything unusual. While assessing the situation, an older woman approached, pushing a wheelchair with an elderly woman seated in it. They introduced themselves as the residents of the home. They explained that they had stepped out for an early evening stroll before dinner. The officer informed them of the fire alarm and the emergency call, which puzzled them. The elderly woman mentioned that as far as she could remember, the alarm system had been disconnected from the house years ago during renovations. Additionally, they did not currently have any alarm system installed, just a couple of standard smoke and fire detectors. To ensure safety, the officers conducted a walk around the house. When they reached the back door leading to the kitchen, they immediately noticed a strong smell of gas. The gas was quickly turned off at the main supply, and fans were set up to ventilate the home. Upon investigation, they discovered a cracked gas line leading to the oven. The daughter recalled spilling some coffee earlier while preparing for their walk. She had moved the oven slightly to clean up the spill, likely damaging the gas line when she pushed the oven back into place. Nothing else in the house appeared to be disturbed, and both telephones were found securely on their hooks. About 15 minutes later, the fire chief arrived on the scene. After assessing the situation, he approached the two women and embraced them warmly, tears welling in his eyes. It turned out that the elderly woman in the wheelchair was the wife of a fire chief who had served in the department over 60 years ago. The daughter's late husband had also been a member of the fire department. Reflecting on the incident, the officer admitted they had never believed in ghosts or spirits. However, the mysterious nature of the fire alarm and 911 call made them wonder if perhaps those who dedicate their lives to helping others are allowed by some higher power to watch over their loved ones now and then.
Story 2. Security camera footage.
I have been on patrol for several years and enjoy mysterious calls like this one. On this particular night, I had a backup officer with me who witnessed everything. Dispatch sent me to a call in a mountain area late one night. The caller had reported seeing several people holding a baby above their heads and chanting while standing on her property. The call sounded unbelievable, and I smirked as dispatch provided the details. After driving for about 20 minutes along a quiet mountain road, I arrived at the address. The area was isolated, with little activity at this hour. It was eerily silent, and no cars or pedestrians were in sight. I approached the house, which was behind a gated driveway and surrounded by light woods. Two dim lights illuminated the front door, but the house itself was bordered on three sides by dense forest. The sight alone made me feel uneasy. I knocked on the front door, standing on a large patio. Suddenly I heard movement to my left. It startled me because it sounded close and resembled the sound of a large person moving. I immediately shone my flashlight in that direction but saw nothing. I continued knocking, now more on edge. From inside the house I could clearly hear two voices, one male and one female. Hearing this eased my nerves slightly. I assumed the sound I had heard outside must have been someone inside the house. Eventually, a woman opened the door. She looked terrified, almost on the verge of tears. She invited me inside and asked me to close the door behind me, leading me to the living room. She pointed to a basic security monitor setup similar to a baby monitor. The system provided a live audio and video feed and was positioned to view the patio and front door where I had been standing. The screen was quiet and showed no activity. As she began to explain the situation, I interrupted to ask about the male I had heard earlier. She looked confused and insisted she was alone in the house. I was surprised because I knew I had heard a man's voice. I pressed her on this several times, thinking she might be hiding something, but my partner searched the house and found no one else inside. The woman explained that she had been sitting on the couch reading when she heard sounds coming from the security monitor. She glanced at the display and saw two figures standing on her patio near the front door. Alarmed, she heard knocking and called the police. I watched the monitor, and while the video quality was low, I could clearly see the patio and door area. Suddenly, the monitor's audio, which had been silent, became deafeningly loud. We all froze. The woman began trembling, and my partner and I exchanged nervous glances. The sound blasting from the monitor resembled wind, but the night was completely calm. I asked her, "What is that?" She replied shakily, "It is them." Her fear was palpable. She then handed me her phone, explaining that she had taken pictures of the monitor earlier when she saw the figures. As I scrolled through the images, I initially saw nothing unusual. Then in one picture, I noticed two tall, dark, featureless figures standing at the door. One appeared to be holding something. The images were chilling, and the more I scrolled, the stranger they became. In another photo, one figure held something above its head, and in the next, the object was placed at the base of the door with both figures standing near it. I tried to rationalize what I was seeing, but it was clear that something unexplainable had occurred. We checked the property thoroughly, walking to the tree line. I mentioned hearing movement on the patio and the male voice inside. My partner, visibly uneasy, asked me to stop talking about it. After completing our search, we returned to the woman who told us she could not stay in the house. She planned to drive into town and stay at a hotel for the night. As we walked back down the driveway to our patrol cars, my partner suddenly jumped into his vehicle and drove off quickly. I chuckled nervously, but as I stood there alone in the dark, I could not shake the unease. I left shortly after.
Story 3. The Hidden Room Mystery.
This story comes from the fire and emergency medical services field, but it did not happen during my shift. Instead, it was shared by a captain who was working overtime with us one day. His story gave us chills. The captain was part of the 1st Due Engine Company, dispatched to a residential fire alarm late one night. Our dispatch protocols require the 1st Due unit to respond to fire alarms with urgency, while the 2nd Due Engine and Ladder Company respond in a non-emergency mode. We respond to numerous fire alarms, and 99% of the time, they are triggered by a faulty system or something mundane like burnt food. Because of this, we rarely expect anything serious when these calls come in. As they approached the neighborhood, they noticed an orange glow in the distance. When they arrived at the scene, they found a 4,000 square foot house engulfed in flames at the rear, with the fire already breaking through the roof. The call was immediately upgraded to a working structure fire, and additional units were dispatched for assistance. The captain stayed outside the entire time, acting as the incident commander, until the battalion chief arrived and took over. After that, he assumed the role of safety officer. From the outside, he remained in constant radio communication with the crews battling the fire inside the structure. Once the majority of the fire had been extinguished and operations were beginning to wind down, the captain noticed smoke coming from a second-story window. Concerned, he radioed the interior crews and directed them to check the room located on the BC corner of the house to ensure the fire had not spread to that side. After a few minutes of searching, the crews radioed back, "There is no room there, sir." The captain was puzzled. From where he stood, it was clear that there was a window attached to a room in that corner of the house. He gave the crews detailed instructions on where to look, but once again, they replied that they could not find anything. Perplexed, the captain requested permission from the incident commander to enter the structure himself and show the crews exactly where the room in question was located. Permission was granted, and he made his way inside, climbing the staircase and heading toward the corner he had indicated. To his astonishment, there was no room there, just a hallway leading to a corner. No doorway, no window, no sign of the space he had clearly seen from outside. Suspecting there might be something concealed behind the wall, the crews breached the drywall. Crawling through the opening, they discovered a child's bedroom. The room contained a dresser, a desk, and a bed that was perfectly made, as if it had not been disturbed in years. Everything in the room looked untouched and eerily preserved. For reasons unknown, the owners of the house had decided to wall off the bedroom, leaving it completely inaccessible and hidden from view. The captain later admitted that this was one of the strangest and most unsettling experiences of his career.
Story 4. Detective's Paranormal Encounter.
I am a detective, and spent some time as an expert on sex crimes and crimes against children. It was both the best and worst assignment I have ever had. One particular case came in at midnight. A young woman with a toddler arrived at one of the precincts to report that her ex-boyfriend had assaulted her during a custody argument. Long story short, the case was legitimate and one of the most violent and sadistic I have ever encountered. I will spare you the gruesome details. To this day, I still have no idea how this woman managed to make her way to a precinct with a toddler in tow. As part of the investigation, I needed to talk to the toddler since the victim said the child was present for everything. I am also trained as a child forensic interviewer. During the interview, the toddler described seeing their father become angry and hit their mother. Then the child mentioned that a nice woman appeared and stood in front of her, blocking her view of the situation. The nice woman held her, assured her that both she and her mother were going to be safe, and sang a song in a language the child did not understand. According to the toddler, the nice woman then walked to the front door, knocked on it, helped both the child and her mother get to their car, and finally flew away. In the victim's interview, she recounted that her ex-boyfriend had held a knife to her throat, pressing it against her skin with the clear intention of harming her. However, she said he suddenly became distracted and ran out of the apartment. She had no explanation for why he stopped or what caused his abrupt departure. The suspect was apprehended approximately 8 hours later. He confessed to everything. When I questioned him about the moment with the knife to the throat, he said this: "I swear I was going to hurt her, but I thought I heard a knock at the door and assumed it was the police. Once I saw no one was there, I panicked and ran outside." He is now serving a life sentence in prison. The mother and toddler are safe and doing well. To this day, I still wonder about the nice woman. Who or what was she?
Story 5. Woman in White.
I am not sure if you would be interested in hearing an Asian story, but I thought it was worth sharing. This was told to me by my father when I was 12 years old. Even now, when I ask him about the story, He can remember every vivid detail as if it happened just last week. My father was in the police force for 20 years, and when he was just a rookie, he had to conduct nighttime roadblocks meant to catch drunk drivers. They had done it many times before, and this night started off routine enough for them. That was until a Toyota Corolla drove up to them with what looked like a white blanket on its roof, flapping in the wind. They thought it was strange, but did not see anything particularly suspicious about it. One of them even joked that the driver was multitasking by drying his laundry while driving home. The laugh stopped when the car came closer, and all of them saw what looked like a woman dressed in white, lying face down on top of the car. The woman seemed to slide backward like a slug until she disappeared behind the car as it eventually came to a stop in front of them. It took a few minutes for my father's team to recompose themselves as they stared at one another, as if to silently confirm, "You all saw that too, right?" The most senior officer finally stepped forward and began asking the usual questions to the driver. There was a noticeable tremble in his voice as he spoke, and asked the driver to step out of the vehicle. My father's team inspected the entire car, including the trunk, but found nothing out of the ordinary. The driver turned out to be a well-groomed staff sergeant in the army who was heading home from a company event earlier that night. He admitted to having had a few cans of beer, but explained that he had laid down in his bunk to sober up before driving, which is why he was heading home at such a late hour. It was 4 in the morning. The driver passed their sobriety test, and they began questioning him further about whether he had seen anything unusual during his drive. Initially he said no, but after more probing, he mentioned swerving to avoid what he thought was a bird flying upside down. While eerie, he did not think it was worth mentioning to police officers at first. The senior officer then advised the driver to stop at a 24-hour coffee shop before heading home. Locals believe that if a malevolent spirit is following you, stopping at a public place confuses it so it cannot follow you to your house. After some hesitation, the driver nodded in understanding and agreed to their advice. After the driver left, the team called into the station and decided to end their night early. None of them ever found out what happened to the driver afterward, but they all hoped he made it home safely.
Story 6. ICU Silent Girl.
I work as an intensive care unit, ICU nurse, and one night, I experienced something that still haunts me. It began with a patient who was dying. No family, no visitors, just him and us. At around 3 in the morning, he began crying, his voice trembling with fear. "Why is the little girl in the yellow dress here?" he asked, tears streaming down his face. We assured him that there was no little girl in the room, but he insisted. "Yes, she is," he said, his voice breaking. "She's standing at the foot of my bed." We tried to calm him, attributing the vision to the medication we were giving him to keep him comfortable. But the man's sobs only grew louder. Moments later, he passed away. The room fell into an eerie silence, and my pod partner and I exchanged uneasy glances. The next night, we admitted a new patient to the same room. Unlike the previous one, she was completely alert and oriented. She was recovering well, and there was nothing out of the ordinary, until once again, the clock struck 3 in the morning. Her call light buzzed. When I entered the room, she asked, her voice tinged with confusion, "Why is there a little girl in a yellow dress standing outside my door?" I froze. My mind raced back to the events of the previous night, but I brushed it off, telling her it was likely her imagination. Hospitals can feel strange and disorienting. After all, barely 5 minutes later, chaos erupted in the room next door. A man in full cardiac arrest. We worked tirelessly to save him, but it was too late. He passed away despite our best efforts. The coincidence was impossible to ignore. 2 nights, 2 different patients. Both saw the same little girl in a yellow dress, and both incidents were followed by death. My pod partner and I tried to rationalize it, but deep down we were terrified. The room now carries a weight, a lingering unease, as if the little girl in the yellow dress is still watching, waiting.
Story 7. Boy on the Lawn.
This story happened to a friend of mine, and it still gives me chills every time I think about it. My friend is not the police officer in this story, but is actually the father of the family involved. It happened about 5 years ago. My friend, in his mid-30s at the time, was living with his wife, their 7-month-old baby, and their 5-year-old son. His wife was a stay-at-home mum, while he owned his own business, which allowed him a flexible schedule. He would drop his son off at school every morning and pick him up in the afternoon. One day around 11 in the morning, my friend and his wife heard strange noises in their house, something that sounded like footsteps. Although he thought it was probably nothing, my friend decided to call the police to be sure. When the police officer arrived, the first thing he asked was, "Why is your son not in school?" Puzzled, my friend replied, "What are you talking about?" The officer pointed toward the lawn and said, "Your boy is sitting outside on the lawn." Confused, my friend looked out, but saw nothing. He then told the officer, "Officer, my son is at school. I dropped him off this morning." The officer turned back to look at the lawn, but by then it was empty. He looked visibly confused. At that moment, my friend's phone rang. It was a call from his son's school. His son had suffered a severe allergic reaction to finger paints that contained an egg-based ingredient. His throat had swollen, and he was rushed to the hospital because he could not breathe. Panicking, my friend explained the situation to the officer, who immediately offered to escort them to the hospital. They drove through traffic lights with sirens blaring, arriving at the hospital in record time. Thankfully, his son was stable by the time they got there. The doctors had given him the necessary medication, and he was recovering well. While at the hospital, my friend invited the officer to come up and check on the boy as a gesture of gratitude. As soon as the officer saw the child, his face turned pale. He looked as though he had seen a ghost. "That's the kid I saw on your lawn," the officer said quietly. Both my friend and his wife confirmed the story, and to this day, it sends shivers down my spine. What did the officer see that morning?
Story 8. Lights in the Basement.
It was around 3 a.m. when my partner and I were dispatched to an old house. The caller, an elderly woman who lived alone, was concerned someone had broken into her basement. She said she had woken up to find the basement lights on, even though she had not been downstairs in years. When we arrived, the old woman was standing at the front door with her walker, visibly anxious. She ushered us inside, insisting she had heard rustling and coughing from the basement. My partner and I headed down to investigate. The moment we stepped into the basement, it was clear no one had been down there in ages. Cobwebs hung low from the ceiling, brushing against me as I walked. The room was mostly empty, with an eerie stillness to it. After thoroughly checking the area, we found no signs of a break-in or any intruder. Eventually, I located the light switch deeper into the basement and flipped it off. Satisfied everything was in order, we locked the basement door behind us and checked the main floor to reassure the woman. As we prepared to leave, she asked, "Are you sure you turned the light off?" I nodded and opened the basement door to show her. To my shock, the light was back on. Keeping my composure, I asked, "Can the basement lights be controlled from upstairs?" "No," she replied firmly. My partner and I exchanged uneasy glances. Steeling myself, I descended into the basement once more. The cobwebs felt heavier this time, as if they were trying to hold me back. I reached the switch and turned off the light again before hurrying back upstairs. We left the house, trying to shake off the strange experience. Later, Curiosity got the better of us, and we decided to look into the house's history. To our horror, we discovered that exactly 1 year ago to the day, paramedics had been called to that very house. The woman's husband had fallen down the basement stairs. Whether he had survived or not, we could not confirm, but one thing was certain: the light in the basement was a reminder neither of us wanted to investigate further.
Story 9. Ghost in the Hallway.
I have spent a significant portion of my career working in historic house museums, and people constantly ask if these places are haunted. I am not someone who is particularly interested in ghost stories, but a good legend often attracts visitors, so I do not shy away from explaining any deaths that have occurred in the house. Recently, I worked at a historic house in a small town where a tragic incident had taken place. A child had suffered a fatal injury after falling down the back stairs. She passed away in the local hospital a few days later, and this story was well known in the area. Many visitors reported experiencing strange sensations in the house. A few years ago, a team of ghost hunters even came to investigate. They claimed to have detected a voice and recorded an object mysteriously falling over during their session, though of course nothing ever just falls over without reason. Additionally, the light above the stairs where the child had fallen was notorious for flickering until it was rewired during a restoration project. We also had a summer student who was deeply invested in paranormal phenomena. She was so involved in the lore that she claimed to have formed a friendship with the ghost. I was always skeptical of these stories. None of the staff I supervised had ever reported anything unusual, and I was often alone in the house without any issues. However, an incident on my third to last day working there shook my confidence. On that day, I was in the house with another staff member, walking them through the daily inspection routine. We were on the second floor when we heard loud banging coming from the back of the house. When we looked into the hallway, we saw that the light above the back stairs where the fatal accident had occurred was turned on. I was meticulous about not leaving lights on overnight, as it could damage the artifacts, and I knew for certain that I had not turned that light on yet during the inspection. I asked my colleague if she had turned it on, but she denied it. As we stood there, the banging noise echoed again, louder this time. Both of us felt a chill run down our spines, and without a second thought, we left the house immediately. In retrospect, I might have accidentally left the light on the previous day, and the noises could have come from outside. However, the timing of the events, coupled with the eerie atmosphere of the house on that dark and gloomy day, left me deeply unsettled.
Story 10. Ghosts of the Prison Grounds.
My dad used to work as a corrections officer at a rural prison. One of his primary duties was driving the perimeter. This meant spending long, uneventful nights circling the prison grounds in a truck, checking for any signs of escapees and securing the area. Most nights were quiet, filled with monotony and the occasional wildlife sighting. One night, as he parked on a hill to read a magazine, something completely out of the ordinary happened. He suddenly felt a deep, rhythmic thumping reverberating through his entire body. He later described it as the sensation you get when standing near powerful speakers playing a song with heavy bass. It was not something he could hear, but something he could feel. Curious and a little uneasy, he put the magazine down and glanced in his rearview mirror. That is when he saw it, a figure outside the truck. Alarmed, he quickly grabbed his pistol and jumped out, weapon drawn, ready to confront whoever or whatever was there. What he witnessed next froze him in his tracks. A procession of Native American figures was moving silently through the truck, passing directly through his seat and out the other side. Their forms were ethereal, faintly glowing, and undeniably spectral. Many of them bore signs of injuries, wounds, and scars that looked like remnants of battles long past. They moved solemnly, their expressions hauntingly serene, as if they were marching towards some unseen destination. The entire scene played out in a matter of seconds, but to my dad it felt like time had slowed. Then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, the ghostly figures vanished into the very spot where he had been sitting moments earlier. Shaken, he grabbed his walkie-talkie to radio the other perimeter officer. When he tried to explain what had happened, the other officer abruptly stopped communicating. Later, my dad found out why. The other officer had seen the same thing before but refused to talk about it. He did not believe in ghosts, and acknowledging the event would have forced him to confront something he could not explain. To this day, my dad cannot forget that haunting procession, and it remains one of the most chilling experiences of his life.
Thanks for joining us on this terrifying adventure. If tonight's story gave you chills, let us know in the comments below, and share your own scary experiences too. Don't forget to leave a like if you want more nightmares, and subscribe if you haven't already. Until next time, sleep tight, and remember, not all shadows are empty.